That's something I was going to ask you about since you're on it right now. The Indians didn't have a value system on race? Or did they do it on peoples, different peoples even within their own race?
Certainly, that was part of it. I mean, I'm sure that the attitudes on race were there. Awareness of race was there. I don't think that they attributed the same things to race, the same importance to it as you find among whites. So that you can look at a picture of Chief John Ross sitting there. He looks like the portrait of that gentleman there, wearing his suit, light features, looking very European, and he's the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. The fact that his name is John Ross is a pretty good indication as to what his background is. It's a little more than Cherokee. But you can look at the portraits of other Indian leaders, and you see people who look like Indians, like you would imagine Indians to look. You see African American features among Indians. What happened among the indigenous peoples across the Americas is as they were coming into contact with these other cultures, it was creating such trauma in their own populations that you essentially have them assimilating anyone who's willing to move there and be assimilated. There's a wonderful account in one of the labor newspapers of the 1820s of a man who's captured as he's riding through the edges of the swamps, and Seminole Indians grab him and take him back to the village. And as he's in the village, absolutely terrified as to what they're going to do to him, someone walks up to him and starts speaking Gaelic to him. Right? The man is a tailor, and when he emigrated to North America, he looked at the prospects he had as a tailor among the whites, not very good, and looked at what he could be in terms of the Seminoles, and he chose to live among the Seminoles. That was quite common. And certainly when we're dealing with the groups that wind up in the Indian Territory, which is the setting for this particular book, you're dealing with the so-called 5 civilized tribes, the 5 civilized nations, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole, and they're all southern tribes, which means that as you have this, as a major reason for their removal, as you have an expansion of plantation agriculture, you have large numbers of runaway slaves showing up in these Indian populations, and it's evident by the time you get to the 1850s. Some of these African Creeks, African Seminoles, in fact, are chiefs, respected leaders among them. And this is taking place as that line of western white expansion is sweeping across the continent. Right ahead of the line, you have these racially mixed communities. And it's a different way of looking at the Turner thesis, perhaps, but no less legitimate than any other.
Do you have these communities east of the Mississippi first? Or
Yes.
is this more of a western orientated?
Certainly east of the Mississippi as well.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get to the west, it becomes very concentrated in the Indian Territory because you're essentially picking up these populations from the east of the river and moving them to what is today Oklahoma, and Kansas, of course, before the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act. And even after, you have a large Indian population within Kansas. And these are mixed groups.
In the book, Race and Radicalism in the Union Army, what territory are you really focusing on here for our viewers to know?
I suppose you could describe it as very much the eastern end of the Indian Territory because that's where you get the most interaction with both the white South and with Kansas. The original title of this book was going to be John Brown's Body, and I think that they were concerned that it would be confused with the poem. But I began to do work in this because as I was trying to catch up on the old career of John Brown, new literature that's coming out on John Brown, and was reading through it, I was finding names that were very familiar to me as someone who did research in the 1840s and the 1850s, the social reform movements, socialism, Fourierism. And these were names that were suddenly turning up in the ranks of John Brown's men out in Kansas. So I was very curious to see if these were actually the same people, and it turned out that they indeed were.